Good afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone is still awake. I think you are, based on the questions that we are at least receiving. So I'm going to talk about the fun stuff, risk and compliance. Just want to get to the right slide. Okay, so I want to tell you about one of my friends had quite an interesting take on risk management. He is a smoker, and he told me that he wants to read up on the health risks of smoking. And I was obviously very happy being a risk girl and caring for my friend. I want him to quit. And at first, he became quite depro and a bit sad when I met with him. And then a bit later, I met up with him again, and then he was like super excited, happy, full of joy. And I was also excited to see that, and I asked him what happened. And he said, while lighting up a cigarette, I quit reading. And that's not how we manage risk at Alexforbes. We don't just ignore it. We actually have a combined assurance model. We manage our risk along 4 lines of defense. So from a first line of defense perspective, this is where management holds accountability and responsibility for that day-to-day taking of risk management and compliance. So we don't see it as something that is dealt with just on the side. It is actually integrated in what we do on a daily basis. So from a people, process, and system perspective. And you would have seen it in our previous presentations done by Louisa, Johnny, Samesh, and all of us. You could see it's all integrated in what we do. We also have a first-line risk and compliance team. It's my team, and we assist management in terms of identifying, monitoring, and reporting on risks. We also have a risk committee meeting at this level, and our executive for the platform, Laura Cookart, she also represents, or she managed the risk committee meeting. Then from a second line of defense perspective, this is where we have our group risk team as well as our group compliance team, and also a group risk committee and a group audit and risk committee, so various risk committee meetings. That's where our ExCo members sit, so Darby, our CEO, also our CFO, as well as our platform executive, Laura Cookart, and also some of our board members. And we report our risks into these various risk committees, and they hold us accountable and responsible in terms of what we said we will mitigate. From a third line of defense perspective, this is where we have our internal audit team. They are independent, and they prepare a plan for the year, and they will do their audits based on their plan, and they report that to the Risk and Audit Committee. Then from a fourth line of defense perspective, this is where we have external audit. It's like our company external auditors, regulatory body reviews like the SARS or the FSCA coming to do reviews. And also, as you would know, for every retirement fund, it needs to be audited. And because we administer various retirement funds, we actually get exposed to almost all the different auditing firms out there, and we can see if there are potentially any further gaps that we need to close in our processes to mitigate risk further. So why do we have this combined assurance model? It's because we want to give you comfort as a trustee and a member that your fund is administered in great hands. Okay, so what happens if you don't have risk management in place? Okay, so then again, the reason why we have risk management in place, so just try to explain, if you don't have it in place, hazards, lots of errors, all of that could happen. But that is the reason why we do have risk management in place. So just want to highlight some controls and processes from our side in terms of mitigating risk. So we have an E&O process, so that's an error and omission process, and we manage that process. So yes, unfortunately, we do make errors. It is human. We don't want that to happen. So we have this E&O sign-off committee where we discuss our errors. So in the sign-off committee meeting, we have Louisa as the head of our operations. We have risk. We have our HR team. We have our training team and also system support. And then the business area where the error was made will come and present on their error, because we want to understand that root cause, what is the reason that error happened, and try to prevent that from not happening again. We've also seen a correlation between having non-standard services and errors. So we try to standardize as much as possible, because where we deviate from a standard, we have to implement manual controls, and therefore it's possible to make an error. Also, why we have this E&O process is to try and prevent future ones. I think we would have had a lot more errors if we did not have it in place. Look like that picture I showed you. We would see a lot more errors if we don't have these type of processes in place. We also have an internal control program, and where we see any gaps in terms of our controls, we also have a forum where we discuss that. We actually report that to our CFO, and we make sure that we can close those gaps in terms of control failures. We also have an enhanced financial assessment process, and that is where we want to make sure that our assets and liabilities, or the assets and liabilities of the fund, is aligned. So that is what's happening in the market. So the assets versus what is happening on the system, the liabilities are aligned. And if there are mismatches, we investigate those. We have proper procedures in place to make sure our employees knows what to do. And also with that, we have segregation of duties in place by having a doer as well as a checker in place. Then from a forensic perspective, we've previously touched on high-risk claims lightly by in Johnny's presentation. So a high-risk claim is where we don't have that employer relationship anymore. So unclaimed benefits, surplus type of payments, deferred retirees. We have an extra checklist, a high-risk claims checklist, where we want to do additional checks to make sure that we've validated that we're paying the right individual. So if anything doesn't validate, we have our dedicated forensic specialist in our area, and she will assist in terms of checking those claims. Where we see some challenges in the industry is in terms of identity theft. So that is a bit of a challenge for us to pick up, because that's where the fraudster actually went and opened a bank account in the name of the member. So when we get notified of those or pick that up, we also engage with the bank to see how we can mitigate that going forward. From an IT perspective, Johnny has touched on it. So we have backups, disaster recovery testing. We want to make sure if something happens with the system that we can bring it up, that we can process our claims or contributions. Also, from a cybersecurity perspective, Johnny has touched on this. I'm not going to rehash that. And then from a business continuity perspective, if we think back like 1 week, 3 years ago, we went into lockdown. And it's because of this BCM process, a business continuity management process, and having plans in place, that we as Alexforbes could continue our business and continue servicing your fund and your members. And we've also won some awards in the past in terms of BCM. Again, why are we showing this to you? All of this together actually puts better control and mitigation in place for your fund and your members. Okay, then from an ISA 3402 perspective, does anyone know what an ISA 3402 is? Anyone brave enough to say what it is? Okay, so this is a controls audit. It's not a regulatory requirement to do it. We've decided as Alexforbes that we want to do it again as additional assurance for your fund and members. So just quickly going to explain what an ISA 3402 is. There are two types of ISA 3402s that you can do. Before I say what the two types are, let me say what the two types are first, and then I'll ask, do you know which one we are doing? Okay, so the first type is where they look at the description, and the auditors is an external audit firm, and they would look at the description of the control and also the design of that control. So just to explain what that means is, if you have a claim and you would say, I would receive the claim, I'm going to check it and process it, they're going to say, is that sufficient in terms of control description? They're going to say no, because there's no checker. You didn't say someone is verifying that check as well, that the processor did everything correctly. So then they're going to say that description is not sufficient. What the type 2 adds to that is to test the operating effectiveness. So example with the claims again, we're saying we have a doer and a checker in place for a claim. They would actually go select the sample to see that what we've said we have in place, that we actually followed that process. So they come in with white gloves, with magnifying glasses, and they check everything. And materiality is not taken into consideration when they do the audit. They actually report on any deviation from a control perspective. Okay, so which one of the two types do you think Alexander Forbes does? Type 2, yes. So again, it's up to the administrator to decide which type they want to do. Some administrators only do a type 1, we do the type 2. And then from a scope perspective, you can also decide on the scope that you want to include in your ISA. So at Alexander Forbes, we include that full scope. So right from installations, changes of standing data, contributions, right through to the financial statements and also some IT controls. And we're currently actually busy with the ISA 3402, so we're in the planning stage. Our report will be ready around July, August, and then we can make that available. Also, just from an auditing perspective, the auditors also relies on the ISA 3402 because they also get comfort in terms of the control environment at Alexander Forbes, and they can maybe do reduced testing then from an audit perspective. And then lastly, just from a regulatory project perspective, Fiona has addressed all the pieces of legislation that we're currently busy with and highlighted top 3 ones. But just how we deal with regulatory change. So if there's a big regulatory change, we actually deal with that as a project. Like the 2-pot system that Fiona discussed, that's quite big. There's a lot of changes that we need to make. And then dealing with that as a project, we get our IT team, our business subject matter experts, legal like Fiona, everyone together and actually discussing what's the best way of dealing with this piece of legislation to make sure that we can comply with this legislation, but also try and have an efficient process as well in terms of complying. And then Fiona mentioned COFI bill, but didn't go into detail. 2-pot system, we've mentioned that, and there's also the conduct of business return. Any questions?